Thank you for joining us today on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. Today we are joined by Anna Binta Diallo, an artist based in Montreal. And in her work, she investigates memory and nostalgia to create unexpected narratives surrounding identity. And she uses collected archival material and images and works in collage, painting, drawing, design, and video. And she's exhibited across Canada and internationally, and she completed the graduate certificate in digital technologies and art and design practices at Concordia University, and AFK in creative practice specializing in video from the Transart Institute in Berlin. And also really exciting, Anna Binta currently has an exhibition which you can go and see here in Vancouver at Access Gallery called Wanderings, and it's up until November 14th, so there's still time. And so now with that, I will pass it over to you, Anna Binta.
All right, hi, thank you for having me today. I'm speaking to you from my office living room from Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke, the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. And I'm gonna share my screen to start providing a little bit of a feedback or presentation, on my process. So just give me a second. All right, share screen. All right. And you can see everything?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. So, hello everybody. My name's Anna Binta Diallo. I'm very happy to be talking to you today about my practice, my work, my creative process, and my trajectory as an artist. And I want to thank Emily, Dalen, and Amelia for the invitation to speak to you all today, and for inviting me to be your virtual artist in residence. It's been very interesting making these videos because I'm so much in my studio, in my head sometimes, that talking about it and the process of it is also enriching for me, because I find out what are the steps that I do to make art, and I'm happy to share those with you all today. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Dakar in Senegal. I grew up in the French Canadian community of Saint-Boniface, which is in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I'm currently based in Montreal. I'm a mixed media artist, and my practice has shifted over the years with the materials I use, but the main conducting thread has always been collage. So whether it's collage like painting, paper or digital collage, creating videos with a cut and paste aesthetic, I always tend to blend imagery in a non-linear fashion, and that usually defies the laws of physics. My background and my first love when I was back in university in my undergrad was painting, and I really loved the idea of becoming a painter, but then I was also torn between my interest in graphic design as well. So in the end, I ended up doing a double major in painting and design, because I was interested in elements of both types of art making, even though they were very different. So I did study design as well, and I think that the fact that I did study design and painting as my majors in my undergrad really kind of helped me figure out how I wanted to make art in the long run. And since I graduated my undergrad, I've always kept design. I always worked as a freelancer, and I always believe that design, like art, has the power to be stimulating, engaging, fresh, and relevant. And I've always tried to find innovative solutions to create fruitful and intelligent design. And I always did that alongside my arts practice. And I think that always influenced how I approach design. And for me, I think because I was working as a designer and as an artist at the same time, I often found myself making designs that were less, that kind of blended elements of both. So there was like I was always interested in like textures that come from painting, or shapes that are very designed. But I think that was always an attraction for me. Like, how do I mix and match both of these different kind of practices together, painting and design? And so I kind of embraced that in a way in my earlier work. And I'm just showing examples here of like how that came to be in some freelance projects I did over the years. So I've done books, I've done movie posters, I've done music covers for albums back in the day when you can buy CDs. I did a lot of like CD art. And I've also done websites, packaging. And I've also worked part-time as a designer for the David Suzuki Foundation. So there's an office in Vancouver, and there's also an office in Toronto and Montreal. And I've been working there since 2013 as a part-time digital specialist. But most of my work I do there is as a designer. And I think that's interesting. I'm mentioning that because although it's not my artistic practice per se, I think working as a designer has also helped my artistic practice. And basically, I find that I can find inspiration in both realms of my work, and try and find a cohesive way of working. So yeah, I think I'm just bringing some examples. So I've always maintained this kind of design career, and the David Suzuki Foundation has always been very supportive of my artistic practice, and which I found very good. As an artist, it's nice to have your employer kind of encourage you to expand your horizons. And so I was very happy and lucky. I'm still working there now as a part-time designer. Yeah, I think it's interesting to note that, yeah, the fact that they allowed me to go on residencies and do artistic research always meant that when I would come back to the office, I would always have new ideas that maybe I think weren't necessarily going to be there if I just stayed as a designer doing that kind of work. So I kind of want to go back actually to my time at Concordia. So after I graduated from my University of Manitoba undergraduate, I moved to Montreal. I made the decision to come to Montreal and go to graduate school. And I entered the program at Concordia called Digital Technologies in Art and Design Practices. And this was kind of, again, a mixture between digital technologies and design, and then visual arts. It wasn't an MFA, but it was kind of a graduate program, a one-year program. And in that program, I decided to do this project called Night Adventures, which was basically a study of my dreams. So for like 6 weeks or 6 months, I kept a dream diary, and based on these entries, I created these designs that were made with handmade drawings, and I used digital image manipulation to render the images. And I think this is the first time where I started to think about how I can use like design and painting and digital images into a conceptual way, in a conceptual manner. And then I also, I want to use something that was intangible, like dreams, to create imagery in a physical environment. Doing an installation, and I also created a book of these images. And this was, I think I mentioned this because this was kind of the early days. It was over a decade ago. And I hadn't really figured out like what I wanted to talk about with my practice yet. Here you can see I'm talking about dreams. And I really was interested in this idea of, using narrative to explain things that were difficult to explain, I suppose, like dreams. And then the idea of collaging things together kind of became a mainstay in my practice after that. But this was kind of the beginning of my, exploration into this. And a few years later, that was in 2008, 2009, took me a few years I was doing some more graphic design and working like that. And then I decided, I think it's probably time that I dig deeper into why I make art. Like, what is it about art that I want to make? Design is one thing, making art for clients or collaborating with other people, but how can I push deeper into myself to find out what really inspires me? And so I did my MFA in 2011 at Trans Art Institute, and that's when I really began questioning, what is it about art that I want to communicate? And I think that was an important time for me, because I began questioning a lot of stuff about my own personal life, about where my heritage, how my experience growing up as a French Canadian Black woman, born outside of Canada, how do those life experiences influence who I became and how I made art? So I started with a very simple question, which was, can we be nostalgic for something we've never known? And I think in my case, that was being born in Senegal and not having grown up there. I had this feeling of nostalgia. And so this was kind of just an entry point for me to start thinking about art. So I started, looking at how I can create an artwork based on this. So I started looking at collecting photos, archives, asking my parents some questions about my family. And it kind of just became this really big project that I was really interested in. And it really kind of helped me reboot my practice and give it something that I was passionate about. And it was autobiographical in a way, but it helped me kind of articulate what it was that I was trying to say with my art. So I completed my master's in 2013. And then I was starting to experiment with collage again and looking at gathering images that were related to my own story, and then creating these kind of narratives that were very personal, I think. And I was kind of blending fantasies with, I think, a sense of history that I felt I needed to connect with to tell a story. So I tried to offer a glimpse of like how we look at our own histories and origins. And I invited the onlooker to seek out the relationship of the self to the other. So these were kind of the artistic components, the research components of how I made this art. And it started off with collage, actually. And then I think maybe midway through my MFA, I realized, okay, I have all these ideas, these collages, they're stories I want to tell. And at this moment, I actually began to shift my practice more into video. So I started looking at video archives, and I started collecting videos and really getting into, I think for me, I like to try new ways of working to see if it can help illustrate the theme that I'm looking at. So I dove deeper into my own personal history. Like I said, I have a paternal history, a paternal connection to Senegal. And then I also have a maternal link to French Manitoba. And so I started looking at, books from like family tree books, I guess you could say, and even archives that existed in Manitoba. And I found out all this important information related to my own family. And I had no idea that there was, it was never talked about that we had a few Indigenous family members in my family, and that my grandfather is actually Métis, and we have Cree lineage. And so there was all this kind of self-discovery about my own family, and this really inspired me to like dig deeper. And I guess during my thesis, I started looking at links between Indigenous culture and West African culture, and I started to create this book that was very basically, it was a collection of stories and ideas that were autobiographical, but it was also a way for me to find narratives and enter myself into the work by showing what I had researched. So that work was it was very important for me, and it was it's when I realized the importance of our collective history and its relevance within my own arts practice. So this is, as I mentioned, it became my final MFA work, which was negotiations. And it was a book. So like I was showing you some images before. It was a book of my research, but I also created I'm sorry, I'm hearing some noise. 1 second. Sorry, I had somebody rang the doorbell. So I was saying, yeah, I was really interested in creating this document, a book, and then the video that would kind of document my process in creating this this video that I created, a triptych video that highlighted. Basically, it was me looking into my own heritage. So on the top screen was me looking on both sides. On the left screen was my connection to Senegal, and on the bottom right screen was my interpretation of my connection to Canada. And those are very, I guess, broad ways of saying, like, it was me negotiating with my own heritage in a video piece. It's like a 6-minute video, and it has sound and everything. So I was really interested into this kind of conveying the images in video and moving and using sound to illustrate these discoveries that I was making. And I was able to show this work in 2016 at the May, Montréal Art Interculturel. And the show actually was a good opportunity for me to show all the work that I have just shown you in one space. So it kind of became like an opportunity to have all the work interact with each other, because they were all different works, but they all kind of came from the same research and the same personal investigation. So that was in 2016. And after that, so I had done collage, video, and I was lucky to be able to go to the Banff Center for residency there. And I had finished my MFA. I was very excited to make new work. And because I had done such a lot of work, like doing video editing and technical stuff, I was kind of really excited to go back to doing something a bit more analog. So I was trying to find work that, I knew that I liked the aesthetic of collage, and I knew that I used that within my videos, but I was also hoping to find ways to make new work. And so I kind of went back to collage and cutting things out of magazines and books. And this was, again, a way to just kind of jumpstart my creative process. And I think I took advantage of the Banff Center's resources that were there at the time, which they had nice printers and like great scanners and things. So I just started experimenting to see what would come from this work. And I didn't go in there knowing exactly what would happen after my MFA, but I kind of just went with it. And what ended up happening was I made kind of these collages, these digital collages. So I started off analog, but in the end, I ended up printing out these collages that I did digitally. And I think I had a lot of fun doing this kind of découpage and exploring as much as I could with compositions. And I think I was also interested in maybe moving away from something that was so personal to me, and just looking at stuff that was already there, like things that were maybe related to me, but weren't necessarily about me necessarily. So I had a lot of fun cutting up things, scanning them, printing them, and then just making a new body of work. And so in this body of work, it became clear that I was really interested in these kind of imagined communities where certain members don't necessarily have opportunities to interact face to face. So I was like reading stuff from Benedict Arnold and Homi Bhabha, who questions identity, national affiliation, cultural hybridity, and the notion of being in between. So this kind of became the In Between series. as I was saying earlier. So it was like this, it kind of took form. And I think I was, it was a new way of working for me. It was like, it kind of reminded me of video, but at the same time, it was still collage. And it was a way of printing things out, juxtaposing images appropriated from, the things I cut out, but I also started including things from the internet. And I think my visual language evolved a lot from like my earlier collages. And it was a very exciting time for me at the time, because I didn't know, I kind of didn't go there with any expectations of what I was going to make. And I left there thinking, okay, I have a new direction now. And it was, again, I started doing these collages, which at times I would add in some personal archives and photos if it justified the work. And I think this is when I realized that through this work, I wanted to things that were like bigger than just myself, something that I was trying to articulate for a long time. And I think I may not have been able to do that had I not gone through all the steps before, which were like looking at my own heritage, looking at my own culture, and what shapes who we are. And I think what I was trying to do is link my story to a larger universal story that isn't only about me, but about many communities. So I think I wanted to invite the audience to look beyond my own experience and also maybe see themselves and enter the work with their own filters. And so, I think I also started looking at the palimpseste, and this word kept coming up to me as this like a parchment that is erased after each use so that it can be reused. And I started thinking about this as a conceptual framing for my next body of work. And I think it's still there in the way I work right now. And it's kind of like this idea that you can remix what already exists. And I think this kind of drives my practice back then and still now. And I after the series of collages I just showed, I started thinking about other ways of using collage and remixing ideas. And I did some painting. I did some painting on prints. And because I asked myself, what is the manuscript of the palimpseste? Can it be the web? Is it our history books? Is it television commercials, personal photographs, or is it memories? So I basically tried to revive this idea of the palimpseste, and again, experimented with painting on photos or painting on digital prints. And I was using this material process as a metaphor for the palimpseste by remixing stories, and just trying to find out what the next narrative of my work would be. And I think, I've already shown a little bit of I've shown some photos of the show at the May, and I can play a little bit of like a zoom on that. And this show kind of took all the prints that I made, all the collages I made, and all the videos I made up to that point, and put them all together in a cohesive installation. And it weaved together collages, painting, prints, audiovisual installations, and it kind of presented to the audience like my own symbolic visual language. And I think the primary lens of this work was really the African diaspora and the Indigenous communities and my own personal look at my own culture. And I think it was the first time where I could see all these different projects come together into one story, or many different stories, but in one cohesive way. And I felt this was like a nice, it was almost like a nice retrospective on what I had done to that point in 2016. So that's after that, I was invited to participate in a show in Berlin called Geographies of the Imagination. And I think this was another turning point for me in how I look at collage. And they had invited me actually to take all the collages that I had made previously and they were interested in, because the show was called Geographies of the Imagination, they were really interested about my work kind of captured this imagined territory that I had created with these collages, and they want to bring that into this group exhibition. And so I amalgamated all the previous collages and I installed them at the gallery in this, sorry, it's a kind of a bad photo, but just to show that it was plastered all over this wall in this gallery. And the gallery was actually at the time in a crematorium in Berlin, which is very strange, but it was, they've moved now, but so it was a very loaded kind of space where I had to show. But it kind of shifted my way of thinking again. I think the physicality and the symbolic weight of the space gave the work new meaning. So I was in a basement of a crematorium. There was no natural light, and it was just like I plastered this space with these collages. But then I thought to myself, what if the next project was not just like a print in a frame or you know, a collage on a full collage on a wall, or just a video on a monitor. And I really began to think about space more, like I started thinking more about space and sculptural elements and how to make things, how to bring things out of the wall, and how would I be able to collage an entire space, if you will. So I left Berlin thinking about those things. And then happily, I was very excited to be accepted again at the Banff residence, at the Banff Center for another residency. I always find whenever I go, I've gone to the Banff Center 3 times now, and each time I go, it's very, it's a really good time to sort of reboot your practice or get new ideas, make new connections. Sorry, I'm just having a sip of water. And so I went to the Banff Center a 3rd time, and I went there with this idea that I want to look more into space, collaging space, and I was thinking, you know, we're living in a global world, we're traveling, and then I was thinking a lot about folk stories, which wander a lot, and having, you know, have looked deep into my own mixed heritage. In the past work, I was really interested in widening my scope and hoping to incorporate new stories and perspectives into the dialogue to discover the affinities and tensions between my own personal mythologies and those of other cultures. So that's kind of how I went into the next phase of my work. And I'm just showing this because as a freelancer, I was also working with, I had been hired to create like a wallpaper for a hotel lobby as a designer. So it was just to bring that up because it was a moment where I was like working a lot with more spaces in my design work, but not necessarily in my artwork. So I was trying to figure out how to bring that together conceptually and physically. So yeah, as I mentioned, conceptually, I was looking at folk stories, and how we all, as you know, it's a way for all civilizations to tell stories about their own people or their people or our people. And I started looking at different areas, points. I started zooming into folk stories, and I started where I was comfortable. So places of my own mixed heritage, so French Canadian folk stories, or French or West African folk tales. And I also start to expand a little bit because I had been invited to present some artwork in Finland. And so I started looking at Finnish mythology, so Kalevala, and I started looking at just a variety of things. And then I noticed, you know, a lot of these folk stories had some similarities. And the themes that kind of came up from this research were issues of, displacement, migrants, racism, geographical borders, and even issues of climate change. Like all these kind of issues were sort of coming out naturally from just looking at folk stories. So I became very interested in that, and then I decided, like, how am I going to start building this project out? There's so much information here. But I started with a sketch, and I think this sketch was like, I'm going to collage a space. Here are my characters, or who will the characters be? How will they be in space? And then I also thought about using projection, maybe. And I was at the Banff Center for 5 weeks, I think. So it's not a lot of time, but it was a good time to kind of turbocharge my creative process. And so, yeah, I just started going with this idea of folk stories, and I started creating these stories, these characters that were from these stories, and I started creating them digitally. So I would like illustrate them and then import them into my digital programs. And then I started filling them up with collage remnants that I had collected during my time researching these folk stories. And I would start filling up the characters with stories again. So the work kind of evolved naturally in that sense. And because I was lucky to be at the Banff Center, I had amazing, printing. I was able to explore with printing very fast and just be able to put stuff up in my studio and just kind of go with that. So I started printing out a lot of these characters. And then I also experimented with, sculpture for the first time, which I had never done before. So I started figuring out how I could bring these characters outside of the wall space. So I really started looking at that. And so it really was a point in my practice where I was able to synthesize many elements of my experience as a designer, as a painter, as a collage artist, and now I was bringing in sculpture, which was a new element. So that was a great moment for me to kind of see that I could do new things with the same ideas, I guess. Not the same ideas, but the same principles of collage and cutting and pasting. And I was, I felt like I was going on a new direction. And I think for me, the density of the old collages, where it was like a full page of, sometimes like, it would be a full print with tons of imagery. I think at this point I was more interested in leaving some space around the imagery and leaving some time to think and to breathe. Just having some fun with this idea that I can rearrange some of this work, and that it wasn't static anymore and it could move around and there was movement. And I also noticed that these characters, if you move them around in space, it would tell a different story, depending on what angle you were looking at it. So there was all these different perspectives that kind of came out from it. And I think this is kind of where my work sits now. It's been showing, there's an exhibition in Vancouver, and this work was shown in Toronto, and I've had a good reception to this work. And I think for me, it was a nice moment to see that the ideas that I went there with, I was able to succeed them by just experimenting and trying things out and having support from the Banff Center and people who were knowledgeable and helping me with bringing out, creating these sculptures. And so, it was a good moment of rediscovery, regenerating my art practice in a different way. But I think in the end, it was still, I think it was something that I was trying to do for a long time, and I needed to do the previous things before that to get to a point where I could create this kind of body of work. Another sip of water. So as I mentioned earlier, I had been invited to show some of this work in Finland, and because of the pandemic, I was unable to go travel there, but I was supposed to go there to do a residency and research the folklore of Finland and create some artworks for that space. So unfortunately, I was obviously not able to go to Finland, but I was still able to create the work for that show. And so I did that all from home, from my Montreal pandemic studio office. And I think for me, it was a nice escape actually from everything that was going around with the pandemic. It was just a way for me to kind of refocus my energies into a project. And so I created a new series of this work that is actually on view now in Finland. And these were very much inspired by my, it's basically, it's the Wandering series continued. And I think this is when I realized that the stories that we read, that we tell ourselves, that we absorb in our lives often come from a location. And, you know, sometimes you can be the outsider and sometimes you can be the insider. And so I was looking at these folk stories from Finland kind of as an outsider because I wasn't there. It's not my culture. So there was this delicate tension between like, how do I tell a story from another perspective without being offensive or without telling people like, this is what your stories are. So I kind of had to find that balance. And then I think for me, what resonated was like that the stories are also similar wherever you go. And I think that became more apparent when I was looking at these Finnish mythology stories. And I was able to find similarities with the stories that I grew up hearing here in Canada, or stories that I heard like that I read when I was reading about local mythologies or folklore or creation myths. And so in a way, it kind of went full circle for me in a way that the stories kind of didn't have a boundary anymore. They were just kind of wandering around different galleries in Canada or in Finland. But each time I would show the work, I made sure to include maybe my own interpretation of a story. So yeah, I think that kind of covers a little bit about like where my process is now, and how these characters find themselves together, or how they come to be. And a lot of them are based on stories or things I've jotted down and research. And they are separate yet connected, I think, is how I'm looking at things. And I think for me, I'm always excited by bringing together characters that maybe never would have the chance to interact in real life. And I think art offers that opportunity, is to bring together different stories and find commonalities. So this is kind of the installation. It's not the best photo because I haven't received the official documentation yet, but this is how it's being shown in Finland right now in one of the exhibits. I have 2 exhibits there right now. And here you'll see that I've moved it's not even on the wall anymore. It's like in space, and you can walk around them, and you can basically kind of stream between the images and tell your own story. And there's no order to these stories, although they are connected. And then I also have another exhibition in Finland where the works are basically, like on the wall in the space, and it's up to the viewer to kind of approach the view of the work how they want to. And I also, at the same time, around the spring last year, I was lucky to be invited to the Capture Photography Festival in Vancouver. So I had some work being shown in the Canada line. So I'm not sure how many commuters were able to experience the work during a pandemic, but it was there. And again, it was nice to see the work contextualized in a completely different space. So I think that, yeah, I'm at this point now where I have other exhibitions coming up with this work. As I mentioned, or as Amelia mentioned, the work is now at Access Gallery until the end of November. And I think showing images of it is always nice, but I think experiencing the work in real life always adds, it gives you a different experience and a different reading of the work. So I encourage you to go see it if you can. And it's also interesting to note that because of the pandemic, I'm installing all this work from afar, but I myself don't get to experience it in person. So that adds another layer of complexity to how I usually like to work, which is I like to be there in person to arrange the work myself. But with technology now, we found nice ways to, create mock-ups and say exactly where we want something. And so I've been able to work with the gallerists to collage space from my computer. So it's a lot of learning, and I think for me, I'm really excited to kind of continue working, and I'm thinking already about what my next project will be. And I'm excited to share. I've been happy to share my process with you, and I think there's always things to learn and to improve along the way. But I think this kind of gives you kind of an overview of where I'm at right now creatively, and where do I go next? I don't know. I'm still thinking about. I'm still thinking about cultures and folk stories, and as I was doing that, this is one of my last works, my most recent works, called Almanac, and I was thinking about our relationship to nature and how much these folk stories really do incorporate elements of nature, and I think I'm leaning towards an exploration on our humans' connectivity with nature and each other and how important that is. And I think my next body of work might start incorporating more of those elements, but I'm not, that's just kind of where I'm at for that part. That's where I'm at right now. And I guess I just want to leave some parting words for other artists or young artists who want to learn about what it's like to be an artist. And I can just speak from my own experience. I think one thing that I've always thought was good was to stay authentic to your voice and your own interests. I think there's a lot of pressure out there in the art world sometimes to make art for what it looks like or for if it can be sold. And I think as a younger artist, I often struggled with the idea that making art about identity wouldn't be considered something that people would like or people would think is quote unquote uncool. And I think for me, it was really important to stay authentic to that voice because I think it makes for better art if you do stay authentic to yourself. And then I think something my painting professor always told me when I was a painting student was to make 10 and have a show. And I think that's a good approach to have as an artist because oftentimes you can make a bunch of things and they might be failures, but maybe your 10th one will be a success. And I think it's a good way of keeping yourself accountable to your process and to not to overthink things sometimes and learn from doing and set yourself goals and then show your work. Even if it's not great, you can still show it and you'll get feedback, and staying curious as well are good ways to, I think, to approach art making. And I also say, you can hold on to the work that you've done in the past and you'll be surprised to see how it will come back in new ways in your future art making adventures. And I guess one of the last things I want to say was, the devil in the details. I think sometimes we look at art making as like this big thing that we want to make, and sometimes it's the little details that will really help bring out an idea or a concept. So I think that those are the kind of backbones, the things that kind of help me keep my practice in check is like, and then lastly, I just want to say, like, to have empathy for other artists or how they work and to think about inclusivity. And then also every artist has their own journey and their own approach. And they can all, I think it's important to build these critical skills as they make art, through participation and repetition, experimentation, and just having an opportunity to share your materials and get feedback along the way is always helpful. And yeah, I think also just with ideas, having critiques with other artists, conversations and open dialogue is always a great way to create your artwork. And then hopefully this will empower you to stay passionate and be excited and show you all the endless possibilities that comes with making art. And I think that's my last slide, actually. And thanks again to Emily, Dalen, and Emilia for the invitation to speak to you all today, and for offering me this opportunity to do these workshops with you all. So that's the end. I'm, I think, a few minutes early.
Thank you so much, Anna Binta. Yeah, I have to say it's such a special opportunity, I feel, to, like as you were just saying in one of your last slides, to hear about your journey specifically, and to see that larger historical kind of scope of your work and how it has evolved and how these different strands have emerged and come together. And because I've engaged mostly with this work you've created, the Wandering series, this is what I'm most familiar with. And so it's so fascinating to see these different concepts, how you talk about them and how they've evolved over time. It's such a, like, it's such a gift to kind of have that backstory. So thank you so much for presenting that. I really appreciate that kind of that scope, and to hear more about your creative process. And so I want to just open the floor. I see that there's maybe a few chats emerging already, but this is our chance. Any of you, if you have any questions for Anna Binta, I know my mind is really going to many places and already has been, because I've been thinking about your work already, but how I would convey it and talk about it to students. And I guess just as one quick thing, I think a thing that I find really exciting about, because I've engaged mostly with this Wanderings work, is thinking about the scale of the work and how you were talking about viewers interacting with it in the spaces, and they choose how they approach it, and also how the stories change depending on the perspective. I'm conveying this work to students digitally, like not in person necessarily, but this is something I really feel excited about conveying, that these are characters that are large scale, and you approach them and have your own interaction with them, and walk around the space. And that's something I'm finding really exciting, and thinking about how I want to talk about that with students. Anyway, that's just me, but I want to open the floor. And if you have a question, I see there are some, maybe we'll call out people's names as we see the questions. So I see Allison, your hand went up there.
Oh, Anna Binta, I have to show my face, just so you can see the smile on my face here. Oh, I just loved this time. Thank you. The generosity of your story, the interpretation of your story, your creative process. What a gift.
Thank you.
I love, again, that connection. And you mentioned how characters that don't have the opportunity to interact with one another in real life. And I'm thinking about us, right? And bringing those connections together for all of us across so many kilometers, miles, provinces. I think the generosity. I love how you spoke about the stories of the inside, being inside of the story and outside of the story, and about the location. That's spinning in my mind's eye. And again, with Amelia, this afternoon we're going to get to see your work again at Access, and that it's very personal, being able to have those relationships and connection with your characters and with each other. So, an enormous thank you. It's been fantastic. And again, I'm so excited to be able to share these ideas and connect our community. So, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Very nice.
I see that, Sean, you have a question if you want to go ahead. And maybe just make sure that you unmute yourself. Oh, Sean, oh, there you are.
Internet is kind of just acting up at a bad moment.
Do we want to, Sean, come back to you? And I see that Valerie has a question. We can maybe move on to Valerie, and then Sean will come back if you're having a technology moment.
I just wanted to thank everybody for inviting me. I'm not a teacher per se in the school district. I'm an education assistant. However, I do a Black History Month program at the schools that I work in, and right now I'm at Carson Graham Senior Secondary. And I had been asking Dalen, when are we going to do something that reflects an African heritage perspective? And then he tells me about this. So I'm so excited to be a part of it. And I'm looking forward to going to your exhibit in Vancouver. Now, my question is, as an African heritage person and mixed heritage, because I'm the same, and I think sometimes people expect for me to focus more on the African side because that's how I look to them. But I'm so excited that you do mixed heritage because that's what I've been doing. And it's so weird, but I've also been using collage as a medium to show that. So my question for you is, how do you find that people are surprised that your work is coming from an African perspective? Or, you know what I mean? Like, are they expecting it not to be a Black person? So these are the kind of questions we ask each other.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always been interested in this like idea of like the woven identity. Like I'm mixed, I'm French Canadian, Franco Métis, Senegalese, and I think I've kind of refused to kind of say. I've always thought it would be fair to explore like all facets of my background, and I think maybe at first I started looking into my African heritage because I didn't grow up there, but I've always been connected to that side of my family because I've gone to Senegal. I have many family members from Senegal that live in Manitoba still, and I've also. But I think that even though there's that physical distance, there's still a way to explore it. And then on the flip side of that, I live in Manitoba. My French Canadian family is there, and I found out that there was some stuff in my own family that I wasn't aware of, and I had to go dig it up for it, which kind of made me think, there's things in both of these cultures that are like hidden or difficult to access, and so I thought that's why I think I'm not sure what people think actually, if they think it's an African person or a Francophone person or someone with Indigenous heritage as well. But I don't want to necessarily stay put in one category, I think. Yeah,
that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sean, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciated your presentation. And I had a question regarding some of the collage elements that you bring in. Do you take into consideration what those are images of and how that might change the context of the work? So for instance, if the background is of Lake Louise, there's a lot of history behind, say, the naming of the lake, for instance. That's just an example. But that would be my question. Is that put into consideration?
I think definitely it is. I definitely consider, like, before I will decide on the image, I think there's a few things there. There's like, I'm interested in the image, maybe just by pure like shape, color, or representation, but I also think about what it represents. So I'm thinking, I always think that, an image can say can say so much. And I think for me, I'm really interested in disrupting that image in a way that it's almost like a new, you almost have to look at it from a different perspective, because I want to break down the origin of it. So a lot of times I'll look at books that are kind of problematic. Like there's some like ethnographic photography happening, or they're really outdated books that were actually like thrown out of the library because they're just no longer considered politically correct. So I'm looking at these books, and I think that there's a lot of interesting things sometimes in there. And my goal is not to kind of perpetuate the same messages with these images, but I really want to disrupt the image to kind of make a larger comment on how we do consume these images and how they do shape who we are, and sometimes we don't even know. And I think that's why I'll choose certain images. And I think there is also an intuitive process. Sometimes maybe I'll say, oh yeah, this image I'll put here, but other times I might just like end up selecting something and then thinking after, oh, like that, I guess I picked that because of this. Like, so there is a balance between like intuition and then also choice. And I don't want to make it too, I guess I also want to leave some, I don't want to dictate necessarily what it is I'm saying within the artwork. I want to leave some interpretation to the viewer, because each viewer, like I said, will have a different association with that image. I don't know if that answers.
No, very much so. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dalen, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, Anna Binta. Thanks so much, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. It's I wish we could all be sitting together around a big table and sharing coffees and stuff, but it's great to see so many people and hear the questions. Anna Binta, my question is revolved really around the collage. It's kind of been new to my practice as a teacher in the last few years, and Emily bugs me because it becomes so much of my teaching practice these days here. But in some of your earlier collages, they really much worked with that rectangle. That's kind of like a painting or our traditional idea of art, where, you know, we look at things that are generally rectangular because they fit into frames and whatnot. And then I've seen a progression to like your wandering show, where you have those kind of silhouetted figures that you're using. So it's the frame of the object, be it the caribou or the person or the rabbit or whatnot, that's reframing things and then like pulling them off the wall to get them sculptural and whatnot. But that kind of use of the negative space and whatnot, it feels very graphic. Like there's a design, like you were mentioning your design background, like that embracing the idea of white space and like that pause or resting space for the eye. So I don't know if this is me projecting a lot on your practice, but maybe if you could comment to some of that. I don't know if there's a question in there, but there was like, those were some of the ideas that were like triggering in my brain as I was watching the presentation. And thank you again.
Oh yeah, thank you. You're welcome. I think for me, the frame, I think, was something that I felt was a bit imposing on me in a way. Like I just always assumed, like, not assumed, but the way that I had been working as a designer and as a painter and collage, doing collage, it was always this idea of like a square and what ends up in that square or that rectangle. And I think I just started thinking, you know, there's got to be other ways to explore this work or these ideas without just resorting to this frame. And I'm not saying that's something that's bad. I think just for me, I was inspired to find a new way of communicating these ideas. And I think the idea of the white space might have just been because of where I was at the time. So I was in this big white studio at the Banff Center, and I had all this space, and it was kind of daunting. Like, how do I fill this space up? So I made the work and I put it up, and it kind of became its own thing right then. But I think I was also maybe I think what happens is I'll create a body of work and then I'll be like, okay, I'm done with that now. Now what am I going to do? And I think it happened when I made video. I went back to collage, and then when I did the collages, I kept some elements, but I think I wanted to like leave. I think I felt like I overcharged the imagery so much that I wanted to like have some place to breathe. So it was maybe more of like a an organic, it just kind of happened naturally that I did that, I think. But I wasn't I think there was those three things of like not necessarily having something in a frame, and the idea to explore, and then also just the idea that I don't have to charge an image with so much stuff all the time. Although there is still a lot of stuff, but I think the white space kind of allows it, or the gallery space will allow some breathing room. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Did anyone else have any specific queries or comments or questions at this time? Chris, do you want to go ahead?
All right. Hey, thanks, Anna, for the presentation. It was really, really fun to listen to. My favorite string of words was, can we be nostalgic for something we've never known? That was kind of I love that. But I have a specific question about your process, and I'm just wondering, does drawing play a role in your process at all? Or does it play a process, and if it does, what role does it play? Because I know you mentioned a little bit about creating these digital images and maybe doing some drawing and then filling in the images with collage work, or are all your forms and shapes starting with silhouettes and stuff pulled from collages? So I'm just wondering if you could comment on what role drawing plays.
Sure. So I think there is definitely a drawing connection, because when I first started painting, like I was really interested. I was always kind of interested in the silhouettes, and so I would paint silhouettes, and that's kind of what was my go-to of like things, how I would paint. And I didn't really pursue painting I didn't pursue my art practice as a painter, because I saw limitations in how I want to create. But I think my interest in like silhouettes and drawing out these things translated themselves naturally into how I will illustrate, like how I will draw out a shape. And I can do it digitally, or I can do it by hand. But I think it's a mixture of both of those things. I think it is very much like the drawing is kind of my canvas now. So I'll draw out a silhouette or something, and I can imagine what goes in it. But I think I'm very interested in like how people move, gestures, and how things move in space, or how they stand still. So I think it is kind of like this interest in, it's kind of a drawing. It's there, it's like, I think people who draw often are interested in those, I guess you could say, like poses or mannerisms, and things that make them human, I guess. And I think that's kind of, it's found itself, it was my interest as a painter, but it also found its way into this kind of collage, this design, collage, sculpture work as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That gives me some cool ideas for incorporating some gesture drawing as like a way to start image development.
Great. Thank you.
Feast, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for your presentation, Anita Binta. I really appreciated it, and I relate to the concept of your work being a first-generation immigrant, actually, and exploring some of those questions myself. I guess my question is with regards to your process and the materiality of some of the pieces. You had a slide that showed a wallpaper that you had designed for a hotel, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what type of sort of paint or materials you used, and did you have to prime the plaster to install some of those shapes and forms?
So just to understand correctly, is it the shapes like of the artwork, or for the slide where I had the actual wallpaper?
The actual wallpaper.
Yeah, so that was actually just a commission I had done for like an interior design company. And so I just created this digital file, and then they printed it and installed it. So I wasn't actually involved in any of that. But it was just, I use that example to show how my interest in kind of, if I can create something for like an interior design firm, I can also use that technology and that skill set for my own artwork. So for that, I think they just used like, I don't know how they printed it, but it must have been sheets of paper. But in the work that I do, I discovered this, I guess it's an adhesive fabric. So I can print on it and it's adhesive to the wall, but it's also removable. So it's actually not permanent. It can be if you leave it up, but the work that I do is actually removable. Whereas the other example I showed was like a real like wallpaper for a lobby. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Matt, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi there, Anna Binta. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
I think you've given me 3 really solid ideas for teaching my students in terms of reflecting your practice. One thing a lot of my students often say is they don't want to go to art school because they don't want to be a starving artist. And you've obviously gotten commissions and gotten paid work from it as a designer. Can you talk a little bit about the business side of it? Like, how do you go about actually making money from your art?
So I guess that's a very good question, because I think a lot of that depends on artist conundrum. It's a real thing. I think a lot of artists will encounter working very hard and not getting compensated sometimes, and trying different things before they get to a level where they can. I think for me, I encountered that as well, and I think you apply for funding and you get rejected. You apply for residencies, you get rejected, and I think those rejections are actually really important, because either you give up or you think, okay, well, it wasn't good enough this time, but maybe I can come up with a better concept. And I think looking back now on things that I did apply for, I kind of cringe sometimes, thinking, oh, like, I can't believe that I thought I would get money for that. But I think that those rejections will actually make your process better in the end, because if you have the determination, you will like come up with some ideas that someone somewhere will want to fund. Or I think there's also, there's the commercial aspect of selling your work, and I think some people might go into that world where they want to sell paintings or sell sculptures. And I think for me, I was never really driven, because I had another career choice as a designer, which was actually, in fact, a choice because I remember my dad told me, well, you can't be an artist. How are you going to put money on the table? So I was like, well, don't worry, I have a backup plan. I'll be a graphic designer, and that can make me some money. So I myself struggled with that. And so because I had a job as a designer, I kind of wasn't necessarily using my art to make an income. So I think there's that as well. A lot of artists have other jobs. They teach, they work in design, they do other things. And I think, unfortunately, it's not a straightforward line for everyone, but I don't think it should discourage you from trying to make art, or at least exploring all the ways that can allow you to make art, and exploring all the avenues that are available. Don't be afraid to, there's going to be definitely some hard moments of, wanting to give up and things, but I think it's also an opportunity to learn about what it is that you want to do as an artist. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Were there any other specific questions or queries or comments, maybe about process or technology or concepts anyone had? One question I wanted to ask, I'm having trouble actually formulating a specific question, but one of the things I'm so intrigued by is your exploration of the folk tales and stories. And one of the quotes I jotted down was your idea of filling up the characters with stories, which I love that idea. And when I look at collage figures, I can really see that. And I love the idea of these visual stories filling up the silhouettes. But I was thinking also about how you were talking about drawing on folk tales from Finland, from Ghana, and different places. And I think, if I interpret correctly, like you kind of choose maybe certain like archetypes or characters from some of these different stories. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of like your process of drawing upon folk tales from specific cultures and using these specific characters, but then perhaps leaving that ambiguous or like blended for the viewer, and how you think about that, or what your process is around it.
Yeah, I think for me, I try to gather, like I said, I was gathering stories and I was reading them and taking notes and seeing like similarities in some of the stories. So, for example, there would be like a tortoise or a turtle in many different stories, and I'm like, oh, that will mean a lot of things to different people, but it's there nonetheless. So I would try to find these kind of common things, and I think I'm also trying to, imagine how a story can be interpreted, and the characters themselves can be, I think they can be from different stories. And I think, but at the same time, I am imposing my own kind of like, this is this character, how I imagined it. But it might not be the same for someone else who looks at it. So I think that I do make choices and like, okay, I'm going to have this character from this story appear, and what will be reflected in that story it always does have a decision that's made like from my own, like I don't put things in there very randomly. But I do think that it's so specific in a way that it's almost becomes not specific, because it has to be, it's almost like insider knowledge. But I think it's also interesting when I hear people look at the work, sometimes they'll come up with references that I had no idea, or that wasn't even something I thought about. And I think that's interesting too, because in a way, like everyone has their own, everyone will impose something on the story, and I'm just kind of leaving them there for that to be. But it's also interesting for me, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that, but I can see how that someone would see that, so it opens up like a different frame of reference for every single person.
Thank you.
Okay.
Valerie, do you have your hand up? Yes.
Yes. I just wanted to ask if you believe that art school is a necessary jumping off point to becoming a professional artist.
Mm-hmm. I can only speak from my own perspective, because I know there's a lot of artists who don't go the art school route and who are successful. I think for me, what really it helps you do, because there's so much about being an artist that isn't being an artist. Like there's so much stuff you have to learn about how to write about your art, how to convey your ideas, how to apply for exhibitions, how to apply for funding, how to accept feedback, give feedback, and then also the history behind art, or the misrepresentation of certain things in art. Like those are all things you can learn at art school. And I don't think I would be able to express myself the way I did today, for example, if I hadn't gone through all those experiences of art, of talking about your art, and critiques and showing your work and those kind of things. But I at the same time, I think I think art is a profession in a way, and it's a career choice. It's also a passion for a lot of people, but to make it your career, I think it does require some sort of education and context, I think. But that's for me. I'm sure there's other, and that's probably, that doesn't encompass all artists, because there's some artists who don't come from that they don't have the opportunity to go to art school, and yet they create things. And I think that just goes to show that there's so many ways of being an artist as well. Like people who use art to create, like it's an expression of our humanity. So we see art everywhere, and not everyone has gone to art school. So I think maybe it's just more about I guess in the context of becoming a professional artist, maybe I would say yes, but obviously I know that that's not, that you can be an artist and not have to go to art school ever.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Emily, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I just wanted to say that, like Anna Binta, you're speaking to a room full of high school art educators, and I was wondering if you could go back and say something to your high school art educators, if there's something you would have wanted to say to them about, your experience in high school art, if you have any thoughts you would love to convey.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my high school art school class, and there was there was a lot of learning things from a specific viewpoint, which was very specific, white male. This is what art is. And I remember being kind of like, I'm going to do this assignment, but I don't necessarily, like, why am I getting an 80 on it or 50% on it? And I remember thinking, like, it was very much, like doing a math assignment. It was either right or wrong. And I remember thinking, you do need, there are basics of art making. There's like these foundational steps to art making. But I think what I appreciated as well, they left us a lot of exploration time. So I actually do quite remember one class we had where it was like, today we're doing collage. And he left us the class and he brought in all these old boxes of books. And I think that was my first, art is fun. Like, I want to make more art. And I think because they let us kind of explore on our own, and it wasn't this kind of imposition of like, this is pointillism. I can't remember how to say that in English, but pointillism. Like, let's make a painting and with dots. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do this, but did it anyways. But that was the class where I had the most fun. I think it was like, here's a bunch of stuff. So I think that's what my recommendation is, like, allow students to find maybe what of course there's basics, but I think allowing them to find what their niche is or what their interest is, and allowing them a little bit of like trust in that process, that they can maybe find things without the supervision or like the hardcore assignments. Like, allow some time for discovery, I think.
I see, Matt, your hand is up still, but is that from before, or do you have another question? Well, then Dalen, I will maybe pass it on to you. And Matt, if you have another question, we can come back to you.
Hi, folks. I'm kind of also being part of the timekeeper here. We're getting close to the end of our time, and respecting Anna Binta's time here. I want to thank all of you, and particularly I want to thank Emily and Amelia. They've done a ton of work here to organize all of this and support Anna Binta in getting the first video up of this video series. I know Amelia's just put in the chat a link to that. It's fantastic. I watched it yesterday. I wish I had students to work with it right now. And we can't thank you all enough for taking valuable time out of your Pro D Day to do this. I know we're brainstorming ways to display student artwork, so please stay tuned. We'll put some of that information out to all of you. And we do have a budget to print some stuff or from supplies. So we'll kind of iron out some of those details and connect with all of you. But Anna Binta, thank you so much. It looks bright in Montreal. It's kind of rainy here in North Vancouver. But thank you all. And that's it. I miss you all. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity again. And it's been nice to talk my process with all of you.
So yes, thanks again. And a reminder that we are recording this, which is such a great resource, so we can revisit this conversation. And we will be sharing this video on the AFK website, along with the series of 3 that I mentioned at the beginning. As Dalen said, I've posted in the chat the AFK page where that first video already is existing, and the next 2 will be coming out in the next 2 weeks. So again, I think with that, as Dalen just said, thank you so much again for sharing, Anna Binta, and for your time. And I think with that, we can close things.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.